Hi guys, Retromaniac here, and today I'm not going to be talking about a game, but rather a game console. Now, today marks the 30th anniversary of the day the Nintendo Entertainment System came out here in North America. So, for about 30 years, we have been constantly playing games on this, such as the classic Super Mario Bros., Legend of Zelda, Mega Man, Castlevania, Ninja Gaiden, and all those other great games. And there's also some other subtle games like 3D World Runner. And probably some other games that are back there, but whatever. Anyways, so for 30 years, we have been playing these great games. And now I think it's time to pay our respects to a great console. Now, what got the NES to where it is now? Let's discuss. It all started back with actually the Atari, strange enough. Now, just stick with me. I know it sounds weird, but let's discuss. You see, back then, the Atari 2600 was starting to lose interest with consumers, mainly due to a slew of bad games. Well, gee, I wonder what bad games they could possibly be talking about. Well, it's not also just that. Atari was also suffering from some financial problems due to the fact that around the time that they were having these problems, they had a slew of games out called the Sword Quest games. I don't own any of them because they're relatively hard to find. Mainly Waterworld's the big one that's hard to find. But there were three elemental games. There was Earthworld, Fireworld, and Waterworld. And not the Kevin Costner movie, even though everybody who's talked about the game has made that joke. There was supposed to be an Airworld, but they never got to it because, well, they were low on money. Now, you may be wondering, how could a few games get Atari this way? Oh no, it's because if you enter this contest, you were able to, win a crown or some other very expensive golden treasures. And if you went to the finals, you got a big giant gold sword. Well, the handle was gold and the blade, I think, was silver. So, yeah, they ran out of money. But remember, Japan never knew anything about this. So, Japan had not the NES, but the Nintendo Famicom. The Famicom was basically, well, the Japanese NES. They had very similar games, just like the NES games over here, but mainly they had a lot of Japanese-only games. I can't name any, but there were lots of games that were only in Japan. So then they decided to bring the NES, well, Famicom, over here to America. Now, at first, we didn't want anything to do with it because we were going through the video game crash. Now, of course, we didn't just strictly tell Japan that because nobody really even said video game crash. It was just people were disinterested in it, and now that's just what we call it. So they brought the NES over again, this time kind of giving it something that felt a bit more home to us. The reason why you have to push down on NES games is because if you all know what a VHS is, a video cassette player, you put the VHS in and then it goes down. So when they made the NES, you put in a game and you push down on it. The problem with that though is that it bends the pin connectors, which are back there, to the point where it can't really read the games. So yeah, that's a bad thing for, even now. I try using this Nintendo occasionally, and it doesn't want to work. So, yeah. And that's why. They eventually released the top loader, but that wasn't until the 90s. And that was just, I think that was, for $100 only, or even less. It was basically what? You can't buy the Super Nintendo, we'll take this thing. So they brought it on over, and they didn't call it a video game console. They basically marketed it as a toy, basically, because it came with stuff like one of them, which I have, being the Nintendo Zapper, shooting duck set with Duck Hunt, and one that I don't own that's really hard to find, which is Rob the Robot. I want to find Rob, but there's a lot of pieces with him, and overall it's just complicated. This game store I go to, Disc Replay, had him, but his head was like broken off, and I think they said his arm was bent and there were parts missing. I'm pretty sure it'd go on eBay for a couple $100. So they brought the NES on over, and they decided to package it with a game. Now, of course, people nowadays would say, "Well, yeah, it did. It was packaged with Super Mario Brothers," but that's wrong. It was actually packaged with a game called Gyromite. I'll pull it out for you to see. Gyromite. Right there, it's part of the Robot series. Because that was what the series of games were called for anything related to Rob the Robot. So in this case, only 2 games. That's right, only 2 games were really made for Rob. Gyromite and another game called Stack Up. I don't own Stack Up because that's also a pretty rare game. But nonetheless, they brought it on over and it was a smash hit. But they wanted something to send it over the table. They needed a game that would make people instantly want to buy it. That is where Super Mario Brothers came in. Oops. I don't own a regular copy of Super Mario Bros. I own the Mario Brothers Duck Hunt combo cart. This is the one that I find a lot. This one's like pennies. It's like Combat for Atari. They're just pennies. But it's still a fun game. Over the years, they released a ton of games, like The Legend of Zelda, which I have in gold, Castlevania, Ninja Gaiden, Tetris, Dr. Mario, and then down here I have a couple black box games. Now, if you don't know, to clarify what a black box game is, I always used to say, basically, it's any label that has a pixelated, that tries to like take a screenshot of the game, even though it looks nothing like it, with a weird space background. I unfortunately have 2 of these that are sports games. 10-Yard Fight, which easily just could have been called football, and tennis. But yeah, there were lots of great games for it. One of them being Ivan Iron Man Stewart's Super Off-Road Racing. But with any console, there's bound to be bad games. There were quite a few of them on NES. Ghostbusters, Top Gun, Birthday Blowout, Friday the 13th, Yonoid, Akari Warriors, Ninja Turtles, Kid Cool, TNC Surf Design, Deja Vu, Dash Galaxy, and the Alien SIM Legacy of the Wizard Jaleeko, which is actually Bases Loaded. That's what I hate. Look at this. The label says Jaleeko, but that's not the name of the game. It's Bases Loaded, a baseball game. The company's name is Jaleeko, but they put that on the end label. It's like, why would you do that? Won't that just like confuse people when when they have a collection like this? They'll be like, "Hey, you want to play Jaleeko? Sure." Oh wait, it's called Bases Loaded. Let me fix that. But we'll get to that game one day. There's also a version on Game Boy. I only have a few other games down here, like DuckTales, based off the cartoon show, which I hear was actually pretty good, and they're planning on rebooting it. Loops, 3D World Runner, which I think I just said. Right there is actually Roadrunner. That's a Black Tension game, which we'll get to. And Rad Racer 2, which I showed in my flea market video. And right here are some cases. Now these are actually kind of neat. Basically, these things are fancy cases that you would hold your NES games in. Now, they had this at Toys R Us, so you can easily go and get them for your collection if you want to, but the main place that these really came from my knowledge, was Blockbusters. Remember that place? Probably not. But basically, it was a video rental store for all you people that don't want to look it up on Wikipedia or something like that. But basically, how it would work is, you'd finish your homework, and then on Saturday or Friday or even Sunday, you'd go with your family to the video store. Maybe rent a movie, or if you have the console, you can rent a game. I think you can actually also rent the console. Maybe. Anyways, you'd find it just sitting on the shelf like that. Now, of course, like always,
games like this, Super Mario Brothers and other such classics, were hardly there. You'd have to be on a waiting list, basically, because the game was popular and people liked it. But what you'd always find there is one of these bad games, or even bad games, the worst kind of games. Bad games that weren't endorsed. Because, don't get me wrong, Friday the 13th and such, that I said while going through that big list of bad games, they're bad, but people remember them, and you can at least appreciate it for something, I'm pretty sure. But then there's games like, I can't remember any names. Oh yeah, Bible Adventures, where basically it was just a bunch of mini games based off the Bible, and even then it's loosely based. Like, remember that part in the Bible where Noah had to fill the ark, and to do that, he grabbed a cow and lifted it over his head like he was holding a radish from Super Mario Brothers 2? I remember that part. You gotta find it in the hardcover. It's harder to find in the soft cover. But basically, that's it for this, and there were also other colors like hot pink and blue. With that side, the NES did amazing. It lasted a long time, and it's up there as one of the best classic game consoles ever. So then, as you can imagine, throughout the 80s and early 90s, Nintendo would do anything to endorse these games. Similarly enough, like how Mario, every Mario game except for Mario 2, even Mario 3, got a cartoon show. And as you can imagine, they were garbage. They hardly went with the source material, especially the first Mario game that got a cartoon. And as you can imagine, they were terrible. But I have a plan to talk about. I'm planning on talking about them. So, what happened to the NES? Why did people stop playing it? Because, as you can imagine, times changed. It's all because technology was getting better, so that led into the 16-bit era with the Genesis. Yeah, the Genesis did amazing, mainly because it was 16-bit, so it was better than the NES, and people loved it. It had classics like Decap Attack here, Bonanza Brothers, Mortal Kombat, and in there is Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, Columns, a racing game with motorcycles. Sorry, I can't remember it. And of course, one of the Genesis's the Sega Mega Drive's most popular game. Well, one of them, Sonic the Hedgehog. I've even got Sonic 2 up here. So, the 16-bit era was coming. The NES, as you can imagine, was still doing good, but people were starting to flock over to Sega. Mainly because, well, 16-bit. So what did they do? They made the Super Nintendo, which debuted in 1991. So, now that the Super Nintendo was out, people were ditching the NES, mainly because it's another Nintendo console, so it's not really hurting Nintendo, but now the NES was starting to just go away because nobody wanted it. Which takes me back to my previous discussion about how back in the 90s, if you couldn't find a regular NES like mine right there, you had to get the top loader. Now, this is a stripped down budget version of the original NES. Now, what's wrong with it? Well, it's not like, well, not to keep gushing about the Atari all the time, but unlike this one where the wood Atari and the top loader really didn't have many problems. Heck, if anything, they improved that one. This one got rid of the LED light. See, no LED, even if I were to turn it off, it was plugged in. And you are not allowed to play with the Game Genie. Well, sort of. You would need a special attachment
But they are very rare because, as you can imagine, the NES was severely dying out. They made this thing, the attachment, for like, I think just about a year only, and they hardly made any, so now they're kind of hard to find. If I can find one, then I'd get it so that I could play with the Game Genie and make some codes again. But Nintendo is still doing good, mainly with their Super Nintendo. I don't own a Super Nintendo. In fact, I have a Retro Duo. We'll talk about that another time, though. And if the NES wasn't helping, then they also had the Game Boy. So they were still doing good. But Sega was beating them in the home console. But now there's like the Wii U, and if you want the most recent Sega console, the Dreamcast, because Sega no longer makes consoles. And I thought I'd just, but I'm getting off track here. This was supposed to be all about the NES. The console that single-handedly, in my thoughts, and lots of other people's thoughts, saved video games. If without the NES, we probably wouldn't even have any Super Nintendo. Well, definitely, but we wouldn't have really the Sega Genesis, and overall, video games would be severely changed. So, that's just my thoughts. Now, let us all sing Happy Birthday to the Nintendo. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Nintendo Entertainment System. Happy birthday to you. I hope this video inspires you all to maybe go on out and try to find a Nintendo. Because, heck, before I even knew what an Atari was, the NES was the first console I ever got in my collection. It all started with the NES, then I got the Atari, then the Genesis, then the N64, and then really the other consoles don't really work. Like this PlayStation 2 here doesn't work, the Wii over there's busted, the N64, like I said, works, though, but, like, the Retro Duo only half works, like, the NES part doesn't work, but the Super Nintendo part works, so it's sort of my Super Nintendo. But I'm planning on tossing that thing out and getting a real Super Nintendo. So, thank you Nintendo for making a great console with lots of great games. Even if they all weren't good, but that wasn't really your fault. It was mainly LJN's fault for making such despicable garbage. But whatever, that's in the past. Heck, I think LJN isn't even really a company anymore. But whatever. Happy birthday, Nintendo Entertainment System. I'm the Retro Maniac. And go play some 8-bit video games. Later, everyone.